code, right? All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarazad Khan, the Regular Events Director for the Historical Society of Ottawa. I'd like to welcome you all to our first virtual presentation of 2026 on the legendary Barbara Ann Scott. Before we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge whose land it is that we meet on tonight. For thousands of years before colonial times, the members of indigenous communities traveled from far and wide to gather at the meetings of the three rivers, the Ottawa, the Gatineau, and the Rideau, from the Chaudière Falls to the mouth of the Gatineau River. This area is rich in natural resources, plants, animals, and fish, and it also provided a convenient meeting place for trade and communication among communities. Of special significance are the burial place at Hull Landing and the Chaudière Falls, a sacred place for meeting and sharing in ceremonies. The burial grounds in the Ottawa-Gatineau corridor, including Hull Landing, were important for rituals of respect and bonding with the landscape. Victoria Island, located under the Portage Bridge, continues to provide this sacred space to local and visiting Indigenous people. The National Capital Region, which includes the City of Ottawa, remains unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. We encourage our members and guests to reflect on this, our connected history, and ways we can contribute to reconciliation. Next slide. Next, we would like to extend our thanks to the City of Ottawa, the Province of Ontario, and last but never least, to our membership. Without your support, none of what the Historical Society of Ottawa does would be possible. In fact, if you would like to become a member of the HSO, I will be putting the link to do so in the chat box. We welcome people to become members of the HSO to support our activities, such as today's speaker event, our in-person series, awards for students, and our Bytown pamphlet series. The Historical Society of Ottawa has been telling Ottawa's great stories for 128 years. We host two parallel speaker series, one virtual, like we are doing tonight, and one in person. On February 11th at 7 p.m. here on Zoom, Dr. Lynn Gell will present Algonquin Anishinaabe of the Ottawa River Valley yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Next slide. Then on February 23rd at 1 p.m. at the main branch of the Ottawa Public Library, Vice President of the Ottawa Muslim Association, Mohammed Gadban, will present the Ottawa Mosque and the Ottawa Muslim Association. Then, next slide. Then on March 28th, at 1:30 p.m. at the OPL, Alison Margot Smith will present the Rideau Canal. And then finally, next slide. On April 25th at 1:30 p.m., James Powell will present the Era of Bytown. That brings us to this afternoon's presentation. You can go to your first slide now. A quick reminder to everyone to kindly keep your settings on mute so as not to interfere with our speaker's presentation, and to turn off your video feed once we get going, which will assist with the overall transmission as well. Tonight's presentation will be followed by a Q&A, so during the presentation, please start typing your great questions into the chat box. And now to introduce our speaker. Award-winning author Ryan Stevens joins us tonight from Halifax, Nova Scotia. He is a respected authority on figure skating history. For over a decade, his popular blog, SkateGuard, has attracted thousands of readers worldwide. Ryan has contributed to Skating Magazine and US Figure Skating, and his expertise has been sought by museums and broadcasters, including CBC, NBC, and ITV. He is the author of Jackson Haynes, The Skating King, and Barbara Ann Scott, Queen of the Ice. Over to you, Ryan.
Well, what a pleasure it is to be here tonight. I was saying earlier, it's very rare that I get to connect with a historical society audience. I'm very used to speaking with all the fabulous folks in the skating community, so it's really interesting to tell a wonderful story from skating history that obviously has such an important Ottawa connection. So tonight we're going to be talking about Barbara Ann Scott, the Queen of the Ice, who is a Canadian figure skating legend. So to start, I'd just like to say that more than anything, you know Ottawa history. I know figure skating history. I am not an expert on Ottawa history, but I certainly know a lot about figure skating history and about Barbara Ann Scott, who was a great skater from Ottawa. So Barbara Ann Scott was the first Canadian to win a gold medal at the Winter Olympic Games in 1948. She was the first Canadian skater to win a gold medal at the World Figure Skating Championships. She first won in 1947, and then she defended her title the next year in 1948. She was the first and only North American woman to win a gold medal at the European Championships in 1947 and 1948. The first and only Canadian skater to hold the European and North American titles at the same time in 1947, and the first champion of any sport to have been formally congratulated by both the governments of Canada and Ontario in 1947. Barbara Ann Scott was born in 1928 in Ottawa. She was the daughter of Clyde Rutherford Scott, who was military secretary of the National Defense Department, and Mary Purvis Derbyshire. She had two half siblings, but she was essentially raised as an only child. She asked Santa Claus for her first pair of skates when she was 3 years old. When she was given a pair of double runners, which weren't the lovely white figure skates that she wanted, she went skating on a local pond and sat down on the ice and begged Santa Claus for a proper pair. She actually loved them so much once she did receive them that she took them to bed with her. She really started skating at the Minto Skating Club's rink on Waller Street. The Minto Skating Club at the time, pardon me, was under the influence of a man named Melville Rogers. Melville Rogers was a former Canadian figure skating champion and one of the first Canadians to compete at the Winter Olympics in the 1920. He was a very influential figure in Canadian skating circles, and if any talented young Ottawa skater wanted to be seen and to be taken seriously, he was the person that they wanted to be paying attention. So she was very lucky in that regard, because became quite an advocate for her. Um, Barbara Ann Scott started working with Otto Gold, who was a Czechoslovakian coach who emigrated to Canada in 1938. And she saw Sonia Henney, the three-time Olympic gold medalist, skate the same year. And she was lucky enough to meet her after the show. So here's a little timeline of Barbara Ann Scott's skating career. In 1939, she was the youngest skater at the Minto Skating Club to pass the Canadian first class test. In 1940, she was the Canadian Junior Ladies Champion. In 1941, the Canadian Senior Ladies Silver Medalist. 1944, Canadian Senior Ladies Champion. 1945, North American Champion. And 1947 was her breakthrough year on the international stage. So, to kind of explain that breakthrough, I want to talk a little bit about figure skating in the 1940s in Canada. So, before I get into the Canadian aspects, I'd just like to talk about the international skating community at the time. Obviously, this was wartime. So, the last Olympics before the Second World War were in 1936. The 1940 Olympics were canceled due to the war, and the last World Championships before World War II were in 1939. There was a great impact of the war on Canadian skating clubs. So, skaters, coaches, judges, and executive members at the club obviously were enlisting. Skating, believe it or not, in those days, at least the membership of the skating clubs, it was certainly quite a social activity. So there were a great number of men that were involved in the clubs. So this did have an impact. And a woman joining the Wrens as well. There was a Canadian figure skating coach named Elizabeth Fisher, who joined the Wrens during World War II. Um, but the clubs certainly did their bit to keep skating alive, but also to contribute to the war effort. They held fundraising teas, blood drives, organized fundraisers for the Red Cross, and the skating carnivals that they held. Uh, Either all or a large portion of the proceeds went to support the war effort. Skating in those days, it's called figure skating. We don't see the figure eights these days, but in those days it was a huge part of the sport. And in order to be a successful competitor, skaters had to spend hours upon hours, usually very early in the morning, practicing these figure eights, which were essentially like the scales that people learn if they're learning to play the piano. Um, so that played a big role in any skater's success. They had to be good at the figures, not just jumps and spins. The power centers of skating during the 1940s were Switzerland and to some extent Austria, Germany, and the UK. And I say Switzerland not because all of the best skaters in the world were from Switzerland, but because it was very fashionable at the time in skating circles to practice in Davos and St. Moritz, which were two winter sports resorts in Switzerland, and they attracted people from all over Europe. So it really was kind of a skating mecca at the time. Canadian skaters were at a very distinct disadvantage during the Second World War and shortly after because of the cost and logistics of travel during the war. The Canadian Figure Skating Association was a new member um, to the International Skating Union. They didn't have much political weight at a time that there was a lot of monkey business going on with the judging. And Canadians were referred to as hothouse skaters. And what that term meant was that, they were raised in a hothouse almost like, a tomato would be grown. So they didn't have, because they trained in indoor rinks, they didn't have the experience with dealing with the kind of outdoor factors that applied when they went overseas to compete in skating competitions. So they weren't used to skating in the wind. They weren't used to skating in freezing cold temperatures and in snow and in rain. So they were at a disadvantage for that reason as well. There was limited international exposure because the Olympics and the World Championships weren't held during the 1940s. There was certainly the issue of the fact that the skaters from Canada weren't familiar to the judges, so they hadn't made a name for themselves. And skating also didn't receive a lot of publicity at the time. Skating competitions were often covered on the society pages, not the sports pages. And that was really the case until Barbara Ann Scott came around. So Barbara Ann won the World Championships in 1947 in Stockholm, Sweden. They were the first World Championships after the Second World War, and they were held on outdoor ice. A North American had never won a gold medal at the World Championships before, and her win signaled a shift. But more than anything, it was truly a testament to how good of a skater she truly was. It simply didn't happen that someone came out of nowhere who hadn't made a name for themselves before and just won the world championships on their first try. Her homecoming when she came back from Europe was the largest gathering in Ottawa since the royal visit of King George and Queen Elizabeth in 1939. She was the first skater that was honored in the House of Commons, and she was famously given a canary yellow convertible by the city of Ottawa that she had to return in order to keep her amateur status and compete in the Olympics the next year. And here you can see the license plate of that car, which says 47 U1. So here's a short video of Barbara Ann in training at the 1947 European Figure Skating Championships, which she won right before the World Championships.
This is Movie Tone. Lionel Gamlin reporting. She's Barbara Ann Scott, who won the Women's European Figure Skating Championships at Davos, Switzerland. This delightful young Canadian skater demonstrates the ease and grace which won her the title. And here she is during her free skating performance in the actual contest. Defeating a field of 20 competitors, Barbara Scott was well ahead of Gretchen Merrill of America, who just beat Britain's Daphne Walker. Barbara's success owed a great deal to her mother's careful training. Both were obviously and naturally delighted by the triumph.
So that's a lovely video. I love that. So just, oh, oops, technical difficulties. Here we are. Okay. So the next year were the 1948 Olympics and the World Championships. They were held in St. Moritz and Davos, Switzerland. There were very poor ice conditions at both events, which affected all of the skaters that competed. Barbara Ann won the Olympic gold medal. She was the first Canadian woman to win a gold medal in any sport at the Winter Olympics. And her successes sparked incredible patriotism amongst Canadians. The sports writer Jim Proudfoot once wrote, oh, pardon me. Oh, let's go back here. Let's try this again. So Jim Proudfoot once wrote, Wayne Gretzky thinks he's idolized today, and he certainly is, but he doesn't know the half of it. In 1948, when Barbara Ann was Canada's sweetheart, the nation's affection knew no bounds. The love was total and unreserved. Everybody wanted to be her brother or her sister, her father or mother or her boyfriend. There were no abstainers. So now I've got another little video of Barbara Ann skating at the 1948 Winter Olympics. One moment here. All right. So after winning, Barbara Ann certainly had a hero's reception. She was invited to tea at Buckingham Palace with Princess Elizabeth, the future queen, had skated at the Park Lane rink in London, and she and Barbara Ann were able to talk about skating, but they also shared an interest in horseback riding. An estimated 150,000 people, two-thirds of the population of Ottawa and Hull, attended Barbara Ann's homecoming parade. Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King and Mayor Stanley Lewis met her train at the station. She was taken down onto the floor at the House of Commons and was invited to meet President Truman at the White House. There was an equally massive parade in Toronto, and she performed in several club skating carnivals when she came back. Now, I really want you to take a close look at this picture and really let the number of people that came to see a figure skating champion sink in. That is a sea of humanity, and it really is incredible. I've um, I've researched skating for many years, and I don't think I've ever seen a picture quite like this. So, unfortunately, there was also a dark side to Barbara Ann's success. She was under constant media scrutiny. The newspapers printed rumors as fact, and nothing got in the way of a good story. She was in the newspapers almost every day, and she had no managers, no media training for skaters from the Canadian Figure Skating Association in those days. Barbara and her mother were very much left to the wolves. Her address and phone number were published in the newspaper, believe it or not, and she had more than one scary experience with stalkers. Police had to be called when one man who was not well showed up at her home. So after winning the Olympics, Barbara Ann made the decision to turn professional. A charitable organization was set up to serve as her employer, with a large portion of the proceeds from her performances going to the St. Lawrence Foundation for Crippled Children. She made her professional debut in December of 1948 at the 20th Century Fox's Roxy Theater in New York. And then she did uh, her Skating Sensations of 1950 tour. This was the first large scale cross Canada ice review or skating tour. It played large cities and small towns in memorial arenas that were built after the war. Many small communities that never had a show like this visit previously had a chance to experience her skating. Uh, and it was quite an event for some of these small communities. When she performed, particularly in Atlantic Canada, she did a show in St. Andrews by the Sea in New Brunswick, and the entire town showed up. um, she went on to be a guest star with the Ice Capades. She performed in an ice pantomime in England called Rosemary on Ice, and she toured in the United States and Canada with the Hollywood Ice Review. And perhaps most famously, there was quite a bit of merchandise that was created in her name, most notably the Barbara Ann Scott dolls. Now, if you ask anybody of a certain age, they either had a Barbara Ann Scott doll or they wanted a Barbara Ann Scott doll. And here she is holding one here in the picture. The Barbara Ann Scott doll was made by the Reliable Toy Company. It was inspired by the Madame Alexander dolls of Sonia Henney and Shirley Temple. The dolls came with pairs of shoes and skates and a letter from Barbara Ann. They were sold from 1948 to 1955, and every year had a different skating costume. And after they stopped selling the dolls, they became extremely collectible. At the time, they cost just under $6 in the Eaton's catalog, and they were the must-have Christmas gift of the time. Long before the Tickle Me Elmo craze, this was the toy that every child was asking Santa for. So Barbara Ann's life after skating. Um, she married a professional basketball player and businessman from the United States named Tommy King in 1955. She moved to Chicago and later became a full-time snowbird in Florida. She also owned a salon in Chicago for a time, a hair salon. In 1988, for the 40th anniversary of her Olympic win, she carried the torch in the Olympic torch relay before the Calgary Games and participated in the closing ceremony. She also appeared at the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. She was very accomplished equestrian. She judged at many professional skating events, and she was a lifelong supporter of Canadian figure skating. When she showed up, she would often come up for the Canadian figure skating championships every year, and she was like royalty, always dressed to the nines, and people would line up for hours to get her autograph, and was always very kind and supportive of the young skaters coming up. And sadly, she passed away on September 30th, 2012, at the age of 84. So her legacy, she is a member of the Order of Canada, Skate Canada Hall of Fame, World Figure Skating Hall of Fame, Canada Sports Hall of Fame, Canadian Olympic Hall of Fame, Canada's Walk of Fame. She was a recipient of the Louis Marsh Memorial Trophy, the Velma Springstead Trophy for Canada's top female athlete. And I think most of all, her biggest legacy is the fact that she inspired thousands of Canadians to take up the sport of figure skating. The membership of the CFSA, the Canadian Figure Skating Association clubs, more than doubled from 1944 to 1952. So that's a huge impact on the sport in Canada. So lastly, I'd just like to let you know that I've written a book called Barbara Ann Scott, Queen of the Ice. It came out last year, and you can order your copy online through Indigo, Amazon, Waterstones, Readings, or Barnes and Noble. And you can get your copy in ebook, paperback, hardcover, large print, or it's also available in an audiobook edition. And here's a look at the book. So I hope that if you found tonight's presentation interesting, that you'll give the book a read. So that takes me to the end of my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. That was a fantastic presentation. Uh, we're now going to have a Q&A session. So if you have a question, just put it in the chat box and I'll ask Ryan. So first question from Elizabeth. Did you ever meet Barbara Ann yourself?
I never had the pleasure, and I would have loved to. So I was a wee little skater. Back when she used to come to the Canadian Championships, I was skating myself, but I never had the chance to meet her in person. So it was very interesting to write about someone that I hadn't met.
Mm. And Elizabeth also Elizabeth says she was a gracious lady who visited the Minto Club many times in later years, and that Elizabeth got to meet her a couple of times. Just amazing, Elizabeth. And she also asks, how would the level of jumping for women in Barbara Ann's time compare to today?
So now, when you watch the Olympics, which are coming up next month, don't miss them.
Mhm.
You'll see women doing triple combinations. There are even a couple that are doing triple axels, which are 3.5 revolutions in the air. In Barbara Ann's day, skaters were doing really the hardest jump that was being done by women was the double Lutz, and she was the first Canadian woman to do that jump as well. Um, but in those days, it really wasn't about the jumping like it is today. Figures counted for much more of the score, and the judges weren't necessarily looking for someone that was pushing the technical envelope. They were looking for skaters that had well-rounded programs and believe it or not. They were often rewarded for landing their jumps on the beats of the music. At the time, it was just it was more about a packaged, polished program than it was about the difficulty of the jumps.
Um, we have some people sharing more encounters. Shirley says that her father-in-law saw the show in St. Andrews. He was so amazed by the way Barbara Ann did the camel all around the rink as her final ending of the show. And Anne says that I have a Barbara Ann Scott doll. I am 81 and I got it when I was about 7. That's amazing.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It's probably worth a pretty penny these days.
Mhm. Shirley also says that her mother, who was working in downtown Ottawa during the war and post-war, um, would go to the arena during her lunch and watch Barbara Ann practice before going to Europe.
Oh, that's amazing. What an amazing memory that must have been. So Barbara Ann, when she trained, she worked with Otto Gold first, but she later worked with a coach named Sheldon Galbraith, and she really was the star of that club at the time. So it would have been amazing to see her skate in person.
I can imagine. I wonder if it must have been nerve-wracking though to have people even watching your rehearsals.
Well, I would think to a certain degree. I mean, but some skaters certainly, some skaters even in practice seem to do even better when they have an audience. They turn it on when there are people watching, so it can be good for some skaters too.
Elizabeth says Barbara Ann was often amazed at the skill level of current skaters, so you laughed at their jumps compared to hers. I can imagine that's a sign of how figure skating has progressed through the years. I think you see it with gymnastics too, that everything has gotten more complicated or more technical, or I guess as time has gone on.
It certainly has, and and the sport is always evolving, and it's always so interesting to hear the perspectives of all skaters who skated years ago and what they think of skating today. And it's so interesting because kind of my job is to is to talk about the history of skating. So I always try to encourage people when they think about the progress. I try to to encourage people to think about um, how incredible the skaters of the past were. You know, they didn't have the skates of today. They didn't have the training of today. They didn't have they weren't competing against skaters who were doing triple jumps, so they didn't have to do them. So I think it's really important to appreciate the talents of people of the past too.
Mhm. Well, certainly a sport can only develop because each generation um, develops it.
Absolutely.
Mm. Ellen says that she believes it was a spiral that Shirley's father-in-law saw because the spin is known as the camel spin. However, the pose is the spiral. I have no idea what any of this.
She's absolutely right. So, a spiral is basically when your leg is held up, and when you know you're moving forward. So that would have been what she performed around the ring.
Mhm.
But a camel spin is performed in that same arabesque kind of position. So I can totally see how you would think the two were the same.
Mm. And Shirley says that she thinks her skates and dress are on display somewhere. Are they at the Ottawa City Hall or?
So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows, is that pretty much all of her memorabilia was donated to the city of Ottawa, to the city of Ottawa archives. There is some material. So there's certainly a great deal of material in the Skate Canada archives as well,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some information that's in private collections and in the collection of the World Figure Skating Museum in Colorado Springs as well.
Wendy says that for the 100th birthday of the Minto Club, Barbara Ann made a generous donation to a trust that continues to support the university education plans of Minto skaters. So that shows a lot of support for up and coming figure skaters.
Well, I think it really says a lot that she hasn't been with us for over a decade and she's still giving back to Canadian figure skating. I think that's pretty incredible, and to Ottawa figure skating specifically. So that's
Mhm.
pretty special.
And certainly is. Ellen says her donation also supports Minto competitive skaters.
Which is fantastic. The Minto Club has such a rich skating heritage, and I want to encourage anybody as well who's interested in the history of the Minto Club. There was a wonderful coffee table style book that came out, I'd say, gone about 10 years ago. Um, and it was called Minto Skating Through Time. And I'm not sure if it's still in print, but you might be able to find a copy. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. You might be able to find a copy at, in a used bookstore, or online on, eBay or Biblio or something, or get it from the library. But if you can get a copy, it's a absolutely gorgeous book, and it really goes. It takes a deep dive into the history of the club, and Barbara Ann is obviously very well represented.
Mhm. Um, we have a note from Emery here says that who says, I am the archivist who catalogs her skating collection and all her wedding gifts. I worked at Skate Auto Canada for many years, and Barbara Ann was one of our Hall of Famers that I worked with for many years. I knew her and her husband Tom King very well. Um, and he's also willing to answer questions in the chat, I guess. Thank
And
you,
he is an expert as well. So he can anything that I don't know, he would most certainly know, and he probably knows a lot more than I do in some
Emily.
respects.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Emery, and for helping with our Q&A. Um, Lynn McFarlane, and also if Emery, if you have anything to add, please do in our chat box. Lynn asks, was Barbara Ann ever offered a movie role like other female skaters were?
I, hmm, to my knowledge, no. I mean, she very well might have been. I wouldn't be at all surprised. But um, there was a lot when you look at a lot of kind of the magazines that covered movies and movie stars back in those days. They kind of read like gossip rags more than anything. So it's sometimes hard to say. I remember certainly in researching Sonia Henney, her career, and she did probably about a dozen movies. Um, and there were a lot of rumors in there about, movie roles she'd been offered that weren't necessarily true, so it's hard to even say. But Emery is right. She did do many commercials. She did commercials for sun-kissed oranges and for Coca-Cola as well. Um, Actually, I think the commercial she did for Coca-Cola was one of the last times. Well, one of the last times that she was back out there on the ice, certainly doing much skating for that commercial. But yeah, no, she certainly did a lot of print advertisements as well. Canada Dry, yeah.
Do you um how do I want to do you know like was there like a main motive for her to go professional because or was it like the natural next step in her career?
I think it was a natural next step in her career. At the time, that's generally what people did. When you were an amateur skater in those days, you weren't allowed to make any money whatsoever. Um, and in fact, her travels to go overseas to compete in these championships, there was a lot of, private donations from people in Ottawa that helped make that happen because she wasn't able to, she couldn't go out and skate in a show and raise money to go.
Mhm.
So a lot of money was spent, and she wanted, I think that she was very motivated to go about being professional in a way that raised money for charity, and that's why a business was set up that basically treated her as an employee so that she was basically paid a wage and the rest of the money went to a charity, and that was very important to her, but she had to make money as well because a lot had been spent.
Mhm. Yeah, it sounds very expensive to try
Figure
and
skating,
have an amateur career when you're not allowed to make any money.
yeah, I mean, figure skating not only is it's one of the most expensive sports in the world, um, but um, it's also a sport that, for that reason, and I think this is important to keep in mind, that not a lot of people, especially in those days, had access to. If you didn't come from a family that had money, or if you didn't have someone that was helping to foot the bill, there were a lot of great skaters that never were able to kind of realize their potential because of the money factor.
And Emery says that she did not like show business. She wanted to be a housewife to take care of Tom. She had no children and had horses. She also supported her mother until the end of her life.
Yeah. So it's it's really really interesting. I've read dozens and dozens of interviews with Barbara Ann, in putting together this book, and that's absolutely true. She every single time she said, I want to be a housewife," and in this day and age, I mean, that might be something. It's not necessarily something that you would hear a lot of celebrities say, but it was a different time, and she was very much in love with her husband, and that's what, she wanted to be a housewife that, kept a beautiful home and made meals, and that was the life that was the fairy tale that she wanted to live after she gave up skating, and I think she was very happy.
I mean, it can be, I imagine it must have been also just a desire for domesticity and I guess calm after, having that many people show up um, to see you and
And
to
and a
deal
life
with
out and a
all the
life out of it.
pressures of fame, especially with no media training or preparation beforehand. That must have been a lot. I can imagine, um, a quiet domestic life with her husband must have been very attractive after uh, dealing with all that. And Ellen says that in order to join a skating club, i.e. Minto, back in the day, you had to have a sponsor, a club member that endorsed you. Otherwise, you were out of luck.
Well, not only that, I think it's very important to acknowledge that back in those days, and for many years, um, figure skating, many prominent figure skating clubs in Canada were almost like country clubs.
Mm.
Uh, Skaters of color were often not welcome. Jewish skaters, in many cases, were often not welcome. And if you didn't know somebody or if you weren't of a certain social standing, um, it wasn't the place for you. So I think that that's something to always keep in mind when you're looking back at history. And it's something that I personally I really try to focus on a lot in my research is trying to find these hidden stories
Mhm.
from skating history about people who were very much underrepresented in those times that were trailblazers coming up against that.
And I mean, that's a big question, but um, I'm personally very curious in that, like, how did or did figure skating become more inclusive to people of color and to Jewish people as went on? Or
Yes, but that is a very, very honest. That's a big question, and it was
yeah.
a very slow evolution. Um, and a lot of those a lot of those changes occurred simply because of certain skating coaches and certain skaters choosing to push the boundaries at the time, and and not be afraid to uh, to put themselves out there.
Mhm. Um, Mariana says, thank you for that wonderful presentation. I was wondering if there was a particular reason that she went around Canada and do performances when she did the Skating Sensations in 1950. And
So that was the her chance to do a tour in Canada. Her fan base was very much in Canada, and she wanted to give back a lot of the money that was raised from those shows went to charity.
Mhm. Yes, and Emery said she had her own show to make money for her charities and herself.
Yeah. And I can't, and as I said before, I really can't overstate the fact of how big of a deal it was for her to go to a lot of these small towns that hadn't, really seen a nice show before. People in Ottawa and Toronto were fortunate enough to have seen some amazing skating carnivals, but certainly, here in Atlantic Canada and in some very rural parts of British Columbia at the time, they just hadn't seen a show like that. So it was really quite something.
Mhm.
She was royalty. I do see that there. Yes.
Right. If anyone has some questions, please put them in um, the chat box. I wanted to ask you what drew you to figure skating? Like like you've written a book about Barbara Ann, but you're also so much very knowledgeable about figure skating as a whole. How did that begin for you?
So I'm a former skater myself, here in Nova Scotia, back in the lovely 90s. And I was also a skating judge for a while. I did that until the time that they introduced the current judging system that they're using. I stopped then when they stopped doing the 6.0 judging system. And after that, I wasn't involved with the sport for probably about a decade. But it was always something, I love to support it. I love to watch. Back in 2013, I decided to start a skating history blog. And I did that for, gosh, about 8 or 9 years before I released my first book.
Mhm.
And I currently have 8 books out now, and I'm working on more. Um, the history of skating is something that I'm very passionate about. It's something that I really don't feel gets enough love or attention, and I am all about any opportunity I can to try to draw more eyes um, onto the lesser told or lesser known stories of the skaters from years past.
Mhm. And what's something about skating history that you think should be better known? Um,
Oh, I
I
forgot.
also a big question, I know.
That is a big question. So gosh, I think there are a lot of really neat stories that I think that a lot of people don't know. The first woman to do a backflip on skates did it during the 1940s as well. Um,
Wow.
a lot of people think that the first woman to do a backflip was a skater from the 1990s. Um, there was uh, there was a skating club in London, England, which was very much tied to the suffragettes, and a lot of the best skaters during the Edwardian era, who were the pioneers of women really finding space in what was very much a gentleman's sport. Were members of that club, the Prince's Skating Club in London. So there's dozens upon dozens of fascinating little tidbits and stories from skating history. And unfortunately, like the telephone game, a lot of the time, stories that, things that are not factual kind of get repeated again and again and again.
Mhm.
And I, that's kind of why I do what I do. I try to shine a light on stories that don't get told.
Mhm. It's very important work. We have some new comments in the
Okay.
chat. Ellen says barriers to join clubs came down in the 1950s, which is when Holland's champion Ellen Burka came to coach Canada at the Toronto Cricket Skating and Curling Club.
So that's a very yes, that is an interesting story. I would certainly argue that it was gradual. I don't think it took a lot longer in some skating clubs, depending on where in the country you were. But Ellen Burka was an incredible Canadian figure skating coach who was from Holland. She was a Holocaust survivor,
Mhm.
and she joined and coached at the Toronto Cricket Club. And her daughter, Petra Burka, was a world champion and an Olympic medalist in the 1960s. So she was actually she was I believe off the top of my head the first Canadian woman after Barbara Ann Scott to win a world title. And the next would have been Karen Magnuson in the 1970s.
It's fascinating.
Mm. We have the most fascinating skating history of any country in the world, and I won't let anybody tell me otherwise.
Mhm. Elizabeth says barriers are still coming down. Skate Canada now allows dance pairs and teams to be of the same sex. I didn't know that. Wow.
That is very new, and I've got to say something here, which I think is it's such a hoot to me. Um, you hear the usual kind of comments that people might have to say about that decision, but yet we have a discipline called synchro skating, which is team skating
Mhm.
where you have 16 women skating together, but there are some people that are upset about the idea of two women skating together. So that math doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I think it's a wonderful progress for the sport. And Canada was the first country in the world to make that decision. And
When did they make that decision?
a few years back, I'd say probably about 2 or 3 years ago, I could be
Oh,
wrong.
wow. That's
Um,
very recent.
Yes, and very recently, Skating Finland and British ice skating um, have been the only other two countries in the world that have also adopted that. But same-sex teams can't compete in the Olympics or in the World Championships yet. The International Skating Union hasn't made that change.
Mm.
But great progress.
Yeah. Hopefully they catch up uh,
You
soon.
know what? Progress is slow. It definitely is. I think that, a hundred years ago, um, skating was still very much a gentleman's sport. And, people always think of it, they watch the Olympics and they think they get, women's figure skating is so exciting, and it is. But there was a time, where they weren't even allowed to compete in the World Championships. So progress is always happening. It happens every decade.
Mhm. Emery says that women skated together in the 60s. It was called saddle skating. Selden Galbraith skated with his brother in ice follies.
Yes. And interestingly enough, back in it would have been like 1900 or 1901, they had same-sex men's skating
Mm.
at the European Championships for 2 years and at the World Championships for 1 year. And then that was done away with.
Mm. Oh no. I hate it when things go backwards.
Yeah,
Um, what obviously allowing same-sex teams to compete on a internationally is a barrier that still needs to come down. What other barriers do you think are still um, up today in figure skating?
I think one of the barriers, something that definitely needs to change in this sport, is I think that, as I said earlier, skating is a very expensive sport. I really think that, you know, money in any way, shape or form, is something that would, it would benefit a lot of things, but it would certainly benefit the sport in Canada. And I think one of the best ways that people, can contribute is to, go to these skating events. If there's a competition coming to your city, go out and support it. Um, and support your local skating clubs.
Mhm. Thank you. And Wendy asks, are you currently writing another book?
Yes, I'm working on two. So Barbara Ann Scott, Queen of the Ice, wasn't my last book. That I put that out last year, but since then, I've done two reference books, one on the World Championships and one on the European Championships. And I'm actually working on two more right now. Um, and I can't tell you what they're about, but they're about skating history.
We're looking forward to them.
Yeah.
And Ellen says there are a lot of adult skating groups in Ottawa and growing throughout the country as people live longer. And Emery says nationals in Gatineau this year was wonderful skating and sold was wonderful skating and it sold out 3 days. That's promising.
Made my heart so very happy to see those full stands, which we haven't, been seeing a lot of lately, but it was fantastic. And he's absolutely right. The skating this year at the Canadian Championships was out of this world. Um, we have um, we have some amazing skaters that will be going to the Olympics, Piper Gillies and Paul Poirier. Um, we have Stephen Gogolev, Diano Stellato Dudak, and Maxime Deschamps. So we've got some very, very talented skaters that you'll be seeing next month at the Olympics. So definitely tune in.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting. Emery says a lot of young talent.
There is a lot of young talent. There was a very talented young skater who won the ladies short. Still say ladies. We used to call it ladies figure skating, women's figure skating. It's just ingrained in me, skating speak. But we had a very, very talented young skater who won the women's short program at the Canadian Championships, and I see quite a bright future for her.
That's fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Ryan, for a wonderful presentation. I really loved learning more about Barbara Ann and her legacy, and I love this Q&A session. It was really meaningful to see the way that so much of her audience either has connections to her or family that had connections to her. And thank you very much, Emery, for helping answer questions as well. So thank you so much. Emery says you should talk.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, which is sounds exciting. So thank you everyone for coming tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful night.
Have a lovely evening, everybody.